Hi, this is Vincent Stacie Sadowski, and we are so happy to be part of Canoecopia 2022. We are happy to be here with you today to talk about Hammock Camping 101. Hold on just a moment and I will share my screen and we will begin. Hammock Camping 101, get outdoors and change your perspective. And we are Vincent Stacie Sadowski of 2weeksinahammock.com.
So I'm Vince, and I started camping. I've been camping about 30 years, and probably the last 20, some have been in a hammock. And it's really changed my camping experience.
And I'm Stacie, and Vince and I have been married for almost 6 years now. And I was not much of a camper before I met Vince, so I am new to the hobby. And hammock camping has been mostly the way I have camped. I camped when I was younger, occasionally in a tent, but this has really made it a fun and comfortable experience, and we're excited to be able to share this with you today. Vince and I are co-creators of 2 Weeks in a Hammock, a website and online initiative to help regular folks get out into nature and to do it safely and comfortably and enjoy. Hammock Camping 101. This is going to be what our presentation is about today. We're going to talk about why we hammock, the basics in getting started, hammock use, gear you can buy, gear you can make, how to hang your hammock, gear fails, and leave no trace principles.
So why do I hammock? Well, about 20 years ago, I was on a camping trip, and the last night it rained so hard, it just downpoured. And I woke up with my face in a couple inches of water and had to pack out everything wet. It was just miserable. And I said, there's got to be a better way. So I started researching hammocks. Well, this is the day before the internet was like it is now. And so I wasn't aware of people doing this commercially. So I started making my own. And I've gotten off the ground, and it has really changed the way I camp.
And I like to hammock because it's comfortable, and look at this view. This is nothing is better than hanging outside on a warm summer's evening and enjoying the sun going down.
Except maybe a cold evening. So advantages and disadvantages. Well, in a hammock, you do get to stay dry because you are off the wet ground. You get to be comfortable because you're off the uneven ground. Sometimes, one time I camped in the mountains and there wasn't a flat, we couldn't make it to a site, an actual campsite with flat ground. And everywhere around us was uneven and sliding down. So in a hammock, you adjust it the way you want. You don't have to be uneven. Below you can be muds, poison ivy, rocks, briars, doesn't matter. You're not in them, you're up off the ground. It is very comfortable, very comfortable. Potential disadvantages: when you're hammock camping, you do have to be in a place with trees, unless you have your own makeshift hammock stand. So if you're in a desert area or plains, someplace without trees, hammocks may not be the best choice. Privacy. Hammocks are smaller. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, lack of privacy. So as a woman, I think women might be a little more sensitive to this, but I like to be able to go inside a tent, zip it shut, change my clothes in privacy. But with a hammock, everything's a little more exposed, and so it can be a little trickier. So you either have to kind of go behind your hammock and make sure people are on the other side away from you, or get inside the hammock to change. It is a disadvantage, but it's definitely something you can work around.
Yeah. And then one other thing is, when you're camping with a large group of people and you're all in hammocks, finding a campsite that has enough properly spaced trees that will work for everybody can be tricky. And so you may have to search harder for a campsite. So that can be limiting sometimes. As far as weight, some people think that tents are definitely way lighter than hammocks. Some people think hammocks are lighter than tents. Neither is necessarily true. In both cases, there's a lot of variation. Certainly with hammocks, as with tents, you can have more expensive ultralight models made of the most high-tech materials, or you can get the less expensive or even the make-it-yourself stuff out of, we use a heavy-duty tablecloth, which weighs a lot, but it's very comfortable. So I'm not proposing hammock camping as necessarily ultralight, but in either case, it can be heavy or light depending on what you do. So common mistakes that first-time hammock campers may run into. First of all, you want to use straps and not rope for attaching around the trees. If you use rope, it can damage the bark of the trees, cut into it. When you are laying in the hammock, you're putting a lot, usually several times your own body weight of force on those straps, and it can really cut into the trees. People can have a tricky time your first time getting it adjusted to the right height and tightness. You don't want it super tight. You want to have some curvature to it. When you're sleeping in it, you don't want to try to sleep just directly along the from head to toe. You want to be a little bit diagonal off to the side, one way or the other, and then you sleep a lot flatter. So that's a common thing that people are making a mistake on. And another is if you are going out, especially if it's not the hottest days of summer, and you don't have an underquilt, you will get cold. When you're in a tent and you're on the ground insulates you. And just like when you're on at home, you've got a nice thick mattress keeping you warm. When you're in a hammock, you've got just a very thin sheet of material, and the wind breeze coming underneath can make you cold.
Yes, and an underquilt is a quilt that hangs on the outside of the hammock, so it doesn't get compressed or squashed underneath you. It stays fluffy, and so it does insulate.
Yep. So very usually I would consider it essential. So some misconceptions, like I said, some people think that hammocks might not be comfortable. They think they're going to get folded too much into a taco and can't sleep that way. Again, that's because you're not sleeping in it properly. So that's something that can easily be fixed. Hard to hang. It's easy once you figure it out. So your first time, do practice at home before you go out into the woods. Figure out how high you need to hang it and how you're going to attach it, what that suspension is going to be like. There's lots of different ways to do it. Hard to get in and out unless you're got it way too high. It's easy to get in and out. It's not a problem. And it's not like the Gilligan's Island where you're going to be falling out. No, backpacking hammocks are very stable, very comfortable. You're not going to fall out. So getting started, what do you need? Well, first of all, you need a hammock, and there's lots of different, you can make your own, you can buy one. They can be simple or complex, but that's the most basic thing. Then you need some type of suspension. You need to hang it from the trees. When it goes around the trees, you do want straps, not ropes, as I mentioned earlier. Usually 1 inch wide straps is considered a minimum for the protection of the trees. Underquilt for warmth. If you're in a buggy area, you will want some kind of bug netting. A lot of hammocks will have that built in. Some don't, especially if you're making your own. It might be separate. I use a bug net that's actually integrated into the tarp. The tarp is another usually essential piece of gear to keep you dry in the rain. And even when it's not raining, dew can settle on the hammock and you can get wet. On a nice starry night, of course, you can go without a tarp if you're confident that you're not going to get wet. But those are really all you need to get started.
Right. And in this image, the hammock is in the center there, and it's white. And this is the hammock setup that Vince made. It's made of a tablecloth, and it does zip across the top there. When you're inside it, you can like zip it shut to stay warmer. On the outside of that, you'll see the underquilt, which is the puffy part, and that is something that was purchased from underground quilts, and that is a very warm model. What is it, the Zero or something?
Yeah, that was overstuffed, extra long, 0 degree. We call it the abominable snow beast.
Yes. And so it's very comfortable. And then the tarp overhead is the camouflage part. With the bug netting in this particular setup is stitched to the tarp, so it creates this large, almost bug room like area, and that's made of tulle, which is material that is normally underneath like formal dresses, like wedding dresses. And that was an inexpensive do-it-yourself item for this.
Yep, very, very cheap. Different hammock types. So if you're new to this, you may only be familiar with the hammocks you've seen in people's backyards that have the wide wooden spreader bars. You get into it and it's nice and breezy, but you do feel like you're going to fall out, and you might. That's not the kind that are used for camping. Camping hammocks come in a couple different styles. The two most common are the gathered end, where the hammock is basically a sheet and each end of it is gathered together and then suspended from there along to the tree. Another common type is a bridge hammock, and the suspension for that, instead of coming from the ends, it actually runs along the sides like a suspension bridge. And those usually have spreader bars on both ends. Again, very stable. And some of them will have an integrated bug net. Some of them even have an integrated tarp. Some do not. And you can buy the components separately. You can get them all together as part of a kit. There's lots of variation. Carabiners. If you use carabiners for your suspension, make sure that they are rated for climbing. When you put your body weight in the hammock, the stresses on the ropes will be several times your weight. So if you weigh 200 pounds, a 200-pound carabiner is not going to support you. You need one that's rated probably for 1,000 pounds to be safe. Day versus camping overnight. When you're sleeping in a hammock, you need the insulation underneath. If you're just got something to take along with you on a day hike and you want to sit back and have lunch, overlooking a nice scenic view, you don't need, you can probably do away with the tarp, the bug net, and the underquilt. Obviously, you still need suspension and the hammock itself. When you are camping overnight, you need to find some place with trees that are properly spaced. Generally, if you're in the woods, wind shouldn't be a problem because the trees will protect you from that wind. If you are in a field and there's a couple nice trees, you might be subject to some wind, and wind doesn't bother the hammock itself so much, but the tarp can be something you have to deal with.
And when you're going somewhere, know before you go, some parks do not allow hammocks for day use or for camping, but so you want to be considerate and make sure you know in advance. Some parks have rules because they're not confident that users will be careful with ropes versus straps and not harm the trees. Additionally, some parks are arboretums and they have special specimens of trees that they don't want hammocks attached to. So just make sure you know before you head out.
So this picture, when I started making hammocks, I made a lot of different prototypes, trying different designs. I was starting from scratch. I didn't know other people were doing it. Like I said, this was back 20 years ago. And I just was on a camping trip with some friends with kids, and we just tied up all the hammocks that I had to different trees, and kids just played in them. And so this shows a lot of the different ideas as far as suspension, insulation on the outside to try and stay warm, trying to get that balance between warmth and comfort and ease of setup. Lots of different ways you can do it.
Hammock life. So when we're hammock camping, this is typically what our campsites look like. Actually, this is exactly what our campsites look like. we have our stuff kind of spread out. We keep our bags either, well, we've got our food bags suspended off to the side, but we'll keep our clothing and our packs underneath us at night in the hammock so that they stay dry as well if it rains or keeps the dew off them. And we will hang things on the inside of the hammock, clothes, just to keep them aired out, hang them over the ropes up above. And additionally, you'll see in this picture on the right, there is a gear loft. It's the green strip. It's got several pockets sewed in it. And we use that for putting like our glasses, our cell phones in at night, our battery chargers for our phones, things like that, just so small things we don't lose track of.
Yeah, and that can be something very simple. If you've got another line running from head to foot of your hammock, you can just hang bags off of it. But unlike a tent, you do want something to hold up your stuff. Winter camping, yes. I asked Stacie if she wanted to go camping in the winter, and she said yes.
Yeah, that was one of our first dates, was a camping trip.
Yes. So when we're winter camping, most of the time we're at a state park, close to an electrical outlet, so a full service park. And Stacie runs an electric blanket in her hammock.
Just me, not Vince. Yeah. So when we're winter camping, we do it a little differently. Normally we both sleep in the white hammock together, and we're able to like zip up the hammock if we need to. It's very large. We're able to zip it up if we need to stay warm. But in the wintertime, when we have on all our extra gear and we have extra blankets, it's really confining. And so in the winter, we'll actually separate out into two hammocks frequently. And then at that point, that's where Vince doesn't like the electric blanket and I do. So
yeah, she likes to bake herself, and I like to be a little cooler. So
but this hammock also doesn't have, you'll notice that the tarp does not have bug net attached to it because it's winter and it doesn't need to.
Okay, so a lot of this stuff, all of the stuff you can buy. You don't have to make it. There are hammock manufacturers who specialize in backpacking hammocks. Eagle Nest Outfitters, War Bonnet, Wise Owl. Those are a few of the big names in hammocks. Underground Quilts is they specialize in quilts and tarps, both under quilts, which go underneath your hammock, and top quilts, which go on top of you inside the hammock to keep you warm instead of using a sleeping bag. So a lot of these hammocks, you can buy them a complete setup, all with everything included all in one, or you can get the parts individually, or you can make certain things. In our case, I made the hammock and the tarp, but I bought the underquilt separately. So mix and match and make your own. Making the hammock itself is the easiest thing to make, and it can be as simple as a bed sheet, and you can just tie a rope to it without even using any knots, just what's called a sheet bend. And uh, that suspension just goes out a little ways and then hooks to the straps that go around the tree. A tarp is slightly takes a little more sewing skill to get something nice, but in a pinch, I mean, you can just use Harbor Freight blue tarp if you can carry it. Bug net can be simple to advanced, depending on how you want to make it. An underquilt can be very tricky because there you're dealing with down and complicated curves and sewing. Skills, you need to know how to use a sewing machine. You don't have to be an expert at it. I'm no expert, but I can sew a straight stitch, and that's all. That's all I need. And when it comes to suspending the hammock, knot tying is beneficial, but you can look at YouTube and hammock websites and find a lot of different, easy, convenient ways of suspending your hammock. This is a hammock that I used for a good 7 years. This was the last real good one that I made, and very warm, very comfortable. In these pictures, this is kind of showing a long span that I did on the top of an open hill. The trees, there weren't very many good trees close together, so I had to make do with what there was. And in the second picture, just shows me being comfortable. I discovered you don't have to get inside of the hammock. If it's during the day, I could zip it up and lay on top of it, and just be hammocks are comfortable. How to hang your hammock. So there are a few things that you have to get used to. Finding trees that are the right distance apart is probably the trickiest thing. Often you also want to make sure that there's not too many saplings and weeds and stuff in the middle that's going to get in the way of your hammock. Usually I'd say between 15 to 20 feet for my hammock, which is usually a 13-foot hammock. But some people, they need trees that are closer together. So 10 to 15 feet may be more appropriate for some people. Getting the straps up the right height on the tree is something that you need to learn for your particular hammock and your particular comfort. And the higher up, you're going to have a looser curvature and will be a little more bendy, and that makes the hammock roomier, but potentially curvier. And if that straps are lower, the hammock is tighter, flatter, but can also pinch you a little on the side. So you want to find that sweet compromise between them. A structural ridge line is something that can go between the ends of the hammock, not as far out as the trees, but just the hammock itself, to kind of maintain the appropriate curvature in the hammock and can ease setup. We use it more as something to hang stuff from, but the height of the hang, you just need to be off the ground. Even if you're just a couple inches off the ground, that's fine. You don't want to be so high that if for some reason you do fall out, let's just say you're trying to sit back in it to tie your shoe and you misjudge and you fall backwards, you don't want the hammock higher than you are willing to fall from. The curvature, we spoke about that. You do want to try to sleep diagonally, especially if you're in a gathered end hammock. Um, you don't want your head and feet up and the middle of you down low to be bent. So if you sleep kind of off at an angle, you'll be a lot flatter. The picture on the right shows the tarp that I was using in this particular setup. I used a cross configuration of tent poles corner to corner to keep the tarp spread apart. And the cross design allows the tarp to actually fold back entirely back on itself for day use, to get it out of the way, and you can look up at the sky, whatever you want to do, or at night. And if it starts to rain, you can quickly flip it back over. Again, this is just one of many different styles of setup. So hang your own hang. Everybody's a little bit different. Sometimes you don't find the trees that are just the right distance apart, and you need to improvise. These pictures, the one on the left, we were at a state park that they set these up for tents, lots of open space. Trees are not too close together. And I had to use a few extra straps and have some friends help me up to get them high enough up on the tree to get a good hang.
But I will say that those were not the only trees. That became more of a challenge.
Well,
because we've been to this campground several times and he's hung other places, but that was like, yeah, somebody says, I don't think you can do that. And so, yeah, so you did.
So I can be a show off sometimes.
But you added, it's got extra straps to make it span that distance.
Yeah. The picture on the right, again, less than ideal. In this case, it was because the ground is very rocky, and the earth was the dirt was shallow, so the roots of the trees didn't go down very far. Some of the trees that we thought looked the right distance apart, push on just a little bit, and you could tell that the roots were coming out of the soil because they were only a couple inches deep. So this was another case we had to span further apart than we would normally like to, because selection was limiting. Our hammock that we use now, now that we're married, is very big and spacious, not ultralight at all. This is actually a 13-foot by 7.5-foot tablecloth, and very roomy, very comfortable, and we can even get our dog in it sometimes.
Yeah, and so we have the white tablecloth that we use for camping. The brown one is an extra. It's the same size. And we can, as Vince is doing this picture, we can sit sideways in it, and during the day use it for just daytime furniture, or laying in it at night the other way. But it's also nice when the weather's rainy and we're stuck inside. This is like a very comfortable place to be when the weather's not so great.
Yeah, there was a time we just spent the entire day, because it just rained all day long, and she's writing in her journal, I'm reading a book, or listening to whatever.
Listening to the rain on the tarp. It's a very comfortable thing.
Very comfortable.
Yeah.
Sometimes things do go wrong. That hammock I was showing you earlier, I used a lot for 7 years, and eventually the fabric one night just ripped apart. It had enough. And the down, that particular hammock I had made an integrated underquilt. So the hammock itself was part of the underquilt. And when it ripped, down feathers just poof everywhere. And the next morning I cleaned things up as best I could, but it was a very sad.
So he's looking sad. So that's the down on the ground there the next day after the hammock fail.
Yeah. So, have an idea of what your hammock is capable of, be aware how old it is, have a backup plan in case something does go wrong, practice at home, set it up, and, not common failures are just simply not knowing how to set it up when you go to need it. So practice at home first.
Right. And of course, never hang your hammock higher than you want.
Oh, and one other thing, always look up for branches
Yes.
that might fall in the night. And this is not just hammocks, but if you're in a tent also and camping in a place with trees, they fall on tents as well as hammocks. Always be careful.
Yeah, definitely. Always look up and make sure that, yeah, there's nothing hanging overhead that looks dead. So leave no trace principles. To apply the leave no trace principles to hammock camping, the first principle is to plan ahead. So in hammock camping, you want to be prepared to go to ground if there's no trees. You need to have a backup plan. Research ahead of time where you're going. There are some places where if you know you're going to a campground, you can research online, either find information about hammock camping there specifically, or some campgrounds have actually photographs of the different campsites so you can see if there's appropriate trees there. And we'll scout out campgrounds ahead of time. We will make notes, keep track of things, and try to always choose places we know we can hammock camp. But you need to have that plan B just in case. Travel and camp on durable surfaces. Principle number 2, hang within the campsite. In this picture you see here, we're in a campground, and there are some places where there are not campgrounds and you hang where you're going to have minimal impact. But in this case, we're hanging over the impacted area so that we're not like off on the side and causing impact in other vegetation. Pack everything out. This principle applies, but don't forget to take your straps with you and leave them in the trees. Like that happens sometimes. So we always do one last swing through and look and double check everything before we leave a campsite. And then the other 4 principles are: leave what you find when you're camping, minimize campfire impacts, respect wildlife, and be considerate of other visitors at all times.
Well, thank you very much for watching our presentation.
Absolutely. And it's been really fun talking to you today. And if you have any questions or would like to reach out to us, there's our website and our email address as well. And we would love to hear from you. Thank you very much for attending, and enjoy the rest of Canoecopia.
Hang your own hang.